If you hear your reference mix and it's brighter, it's a very broad concept. You can't just grab a high shelf and slap it on your mix and start making things brighter. You'll, in all likelihood, at some point, you'll break your mix. It's really critical in reference listening to not just know what the differences are, but where those differences come from. And then it's a whole other analysis on top of that to know, what do you do about that? Welcome to After Hours. My name is Gregory Scott. Tonight I want to hit up a topic that's, I got a love-hate relationship with this thing, which is reference mixing. Let's just kick it right off with Robin Berg. Robin asks, what is your philosophical view on reference listening? And what's your mindset when you're reference listening? The technical aspect I get, that is volume matching, comparing low-end, mid-range, high-end, etc., but it doesn't turn out that great for me. When I start compensating for the differences I hear and see, get back to that, I often ruin things emotionally. I know I should focus on my problem areas when I start comparing my mix to the reference, but the differences overwhelm me. That's a great question, Robin. So for those who don't know exactly what Robin's asking about with the reference listening, in a nutshell, it's very simply when you're comparing your mix to something that is finished, mixed and mastered, and we'll get into the whys of all of that, but first let's hit the how that you do this. You cannot, you should not, please do not just switch over to iTunes or Spotify and start playing the reference mix and then switching back to your mix. It is absolutely critical when reference listening to level match your mix and the thing you're comparing it to. And the beautiful thing is there are plugins that do this now. One's called Magic AB. Another, I think, is called Reference from Mastering the Mix. I don't know that it matters which of these things you use, but it very much matters that you pick one and use it, because the smallest level discrepancies will cause you to make adjustments or to hear things that don't actually exist. They're just volume related. So, with that little thing out of the way, let's get into Robin's question is, what are you listening for when you're referencing another finished mix? I want to back it up. Something even more critical, I think, which is, why have you chosen the reference? Or what should you be listening for in a reference in the first place, let alone how do you go about chasing those qualities with your mix? I think a mistake that a lot of people make when they're referencing is they just kind of pick something that they love or that they wish this thing that they're working on sounded like, or even more importantly, felt like, is oftentimes the analysis under the surface there. That's not going to cut it. You can't just pick, even if it's in the same genre, you can't just pick some other thing that you love and say, I'm going to make this sound like this, or I'm going to compare this and make changes to this thing. Because I think if you do that, you'll end up in Robin's boat here, which is you start chasing things that you ought not to be chasing. Maybe you're even doing it in ways that are not advisable. So the thing about choosing a reference is that you're going to hear differences. There will always be differences. But you're probably going to start doing things to your mix in order to bridge the gap that you ought not to be doing. So if you hear your reference mix and it's brighter, it's a very broad concept. You can't just grab a high shelf and slap it on your mix and start making things brighter. You'll, in all likelihood, at some point, you'll break your mix because your mix is balances, right? There's a spectral balance in there, but your mix is really about balances of instruments. And if you just start cranking a high shelf to make your mix arbitrarily brighter, because that's really what you're doing. I know you like your reference, but if you're taking your mix, you just start making it brighter by putting an EQ on the mix bus or just putting an EQ on the drum bus. You're like, I'll be smart. I'll just put this on the drum bus so I don't crank up the whole mix. Then you're making your cymbals brighter, more present. That may or may not be, and it probably is not what your mix actually wants from an emotional level, and that's why Robin's coming up against this thing. So if you're listening to your reference and you're like, okay, the reference is brighter, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, does that matter? Listen to a couple other references maybe to try to get a sense of this. When you're level matched, listen to a few things and be like, okay, it turns out my mix is dark compared to this one, but it's actually kind of in the pocket with this one over here. Maybe it's even a little brighter than this one over here. And that's good information to have, because then you know, maybe brightness isn't really something that I need to be chasing here, which calls into question why you chose that reference in the first place. If you decide, okay, my reference is brighter, And that does actually matter. I can now hear that I've got this sort of like perspective check, and I'm like listening to this commercial thing, and I'm like, oh, my mix is actually, it sounds cloudy, as a matter of fact. It's really critical when reference listening to not just know what the differences are, but where those differences come from. And then it's a whole other analysis on top of that to know, what do you do about that? How is that reference mix brighter? It might be that the cymbals are just more aggressively mixed. It's not an EQ thing. It's a volume thing on the bright elements of the mix. Maybe it's the fact that there's one element in that other mix that's really got like 3K cranked up. Maybe it's the vocal. Maybe they distorted the crap out of the vocal, and that one bright element is really making the whole mix feel elevated and out of the mud. You have to start getting holistic with this stuff. And so I think this is why backing it up and saying, okay, I really need to choose my reference wisely. I advise you to try picking something that's not in the same style, not of the same tempo, not the same genre, not even the same vibe of production. Just go with something that has maybe roughly the same sonic fingerprint, something that's kind of in the ballpark of where you already are. Because here's the thing, this is about trusting your instincts as much as anything else. So if you've got music in your catalog where you could bring a reference in and be like, oh my God, this mix I'm doing is so dark, I might need to tear everything down. Don't go there. What you'll notice, if you really start comparing a lot of references to your mix, there is no standard sound of things. There are mixes that are dark and muddy. They still feel great. There are mixes that are really bright, almost strident and super thin on the bottom end. They feel great. I'm just going to throw one out there. Prince. When's the last time you listened to When Doves Cry by Prince? I'm not a huge Prince fan, but I've always respected his work tremendously. If you listen to When Doves Cry, you'd be like, interesting. There's no bass. Like literally, there's no bass and there's no bass. There's no low frequency information. It's like they muted the bass instrument and then high-passed the mix at like 120 hertz. Like there's nothing down there. So it's not even at all a modern sound. It's not, we go for this really deep extension now, but When Doves Cry was and continues to be an amazingly popular song. Is that in spite of the Sonics? I don't know. That's a whole argument you can make around it. The point is, it doesn't matter. The song is what grabs people. That's always going to be true. So one of the most important things that you can have in your mindset when referencing is, okay, there are differences between my mix and the mastered version of this song over here. Does that really matter? And if you're convinced that it does matter, then you've got to ask yourself, why do those differences exist? And then you've got to ask yourself, how can I make changes to my mix to get me from point A to point B in a way that doesn't destroy what I've done? Because in so many ways, if you think about it, chasing a reference is overriding your instinct. And I'm not a big fan of that. If your instinct told you that this is how much 12K you need, probably okay. If you want to make it more commercial sounding, if you need to feel safe and put it more in the pocket of a bunch of other releases that are in that style or anything, then nudge it in that direction a little bit, but be content to stop a little shy of going all the way. Because let's face it, they're different songs. They don't need the same treatment. They don't need to sound the same. Just use the reference more as kind of a brain reset to get yourself in a universe. That's really where you want to be. You don't want to match this thing up. Don't use a freaking match EQ and get your tonal curves the same. That never works. Never works. So just get yourself kind of, sort of, maybe in the ballpark-ish of this thing over there, and then trust that what you've done is good enough, stands on its own, holds its ground. Put it down, come back the next day, listen to a couple of songs, just casually listen to music that you love, switch over to your mix. Is it a big deal? Is it kind of feeling like, okay, it could fit in with these other songs in a playlist, it's fine. Put it out there, get it done. So that's my mindset when referencing. I try to listen for big picture stuff. If there's something really glaring in terms of the discrepancies, I'll figure out, why is that? Does it actually matter? If it does matter, how can I push in that direction while preserving what I've done? And then at the end of the day, that's it. Because I'm not out to copy what other people have done. I'm out to make my thing. If my thing's a little dark, that's okay. If it's a little bass heavy, that's okay. Whatever. Put it out there. It's art. So get to it. Enjoy the process. Thanks